It was the sound of glass breaking that first pulled me from sleep. Not the kind of clumsy accident you hear when someone drops a cup in the kitchen, but the sharp, deliberate snap of a windowpane giving way. I stayed still, listening. My villa sits high above the coast, quiet, with no neighbors close enough to make noise like that. The only people who could be in my house at that hour were intruders. I reached for the baseball bat I keep leaned against the nightstand. Old habit. At my age, you don't move quick, but you learn to move smart. I heard muffled voices, laughter, young, careless. One voice I knew too well. My son-in-law, Eric. He thought he was whispering, but that nasal tone carried through the halls just fine. The realization burned in my chest. My daughter's husband. The same man who sat at my table, carving roast chicken with a smile, calling me Dad, like it meant something. And now here he was, breaking into my home with two of his friends. I slipped from the bed, careful not to let the floorboards creak, and made my way down the back staircase. Their shadows stretched across the living room, flashlights darting over the furniture I'd chosen with my wife decades ago. I heard one of them mutter about the safe upstairs. They thought they were going to rob me blind, thought I'd be sleeping too heavy to notice. That was when it clicked. This wasn't just a burglary. This was personal. Eric had been in this house 100 times. He knew where I kept the safe, where the spare keys were, even which rooms I used and which ones I left locked. He hadn't come here for money alone. He'd come to show me I was weak, that he could take from me whenever he wanted. I tightened my grip on the bat and stepped into the shadows by the kitchen doorway, waiting. My heart was steady, not from courage but from anger. Betrayal has a way of burning away fear. I wanted him to see me before I taught him the lesson he came here for. And when the beam of his flashlight finally swept across my face, the look in his eyes told me he hadn't expected the old man to be standing there, awake, waiting. The moment Eric's flashlight caught me, his whole body froze. His two friends weren't so quick to realize who I was. One of them chuckled nervously, nudging him in the ribs. "Go on, man. It's just some old dude." Old dude. They didn't know me, not really. Eric did. He knew what I'd lived through, what I was capable of when someone thought they could step into my home and make me feel small. His face went pale, and he whispered something sharp under his breath, but his buddies were too cocky to hear the warning. I let them laugh. Let them shine their lights around, admiring what they thought they were about to steal. Then I stepped forward into the beam, the bat hanging loose in my hand, and spoke with the same voice I used to use on factory floors when men twice my size got out of line. "You boys are making the biggest mistake of your lives." Silence. Even the night outside seemed to hold its breath. The one on the left, stocky, shaved head, snorted and took a step toward me. "Mistake? You don't scare me, Grandpa." That was when I moved. I didn't swing for his head, didn't try to end anything too soon. I drove the bat straight into his knee. The crack echoed off the villa walls like a gunshot. He screamed, dropping his flashlight, clutching at the ruined joint. The other one jumped back, cursing. Eric just stood there, frozen between fear and shame. "See," I told them, keeping my voice calm. "You thought I was asleep. You thought I was weak. But this is my house. And in my house, I decide how this ends." The second friend, taller, wiry, with a cheap ski mask hanging loose around his neck, tried to bluff. He pulled a knife from his pocket, waving it clumsily in front of him. His hand shook more than he wanted it to. "Back off, old man, or I'll cut you." I didn't back off. I stepped closer, eyes locked on his, bat resting easy on my shoulder like I had all the time in the world. "You're not gonna cut anyone. You're gonna drop that blade, pick up your friend, and crawl out of here before I decide to do worse." He hesitated. I saw his grip falter. He wasn't ready for this. None of them were. They thought they were breaking into some retiree's holiday house, not facing a man who'd buried too many regrets to let 3 punks take what was his. And then I turned to Eric. My son-in-law, standing there with his mouth half open, sweat glistening on his forehead. You brought them here, I said quietly. You brought strangers into my home. Into your wife's father's home. Why? He tried to talk, but the words stumbled out like broken glass. Things are hard. I needed. Needed what? I snapped. Money? Respect? Or to prove you're more of a man than me? He lowered his eyes. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about money. He wanted to humiliate me, to step inside my walls and show me I couldn't protect what I'd built. And that, son, was when I decided the lesson he came here for would be one he would never forget. I stood in the glow of their dropped flashlights, the beam cutting across the marble floor. The one with the busted knee kept groaning, rocking back and forth, while the tall one still clutched his knife but couldn't keep it steady. Eric looked like he wanted to melt into the wall. You've got one chance, I told them, lowering the bat but keeping my voice steady. To walk out before things get worse. The tall one shook his head. We ain't leaving empty-handed. His voice cracked on empty. I took a step forward, and he instinctively stepped back. That was all I needed. Fear was already breaking him apart. I snatched the knife from his hand before he could blink, turned it in my palm, and pressed the flat edge against his chest. Do you feel that? I asked. He nodded, sweat beading on his lip. That's the difference between a man ready to fight and a boy who only knows how to wave steel around. I shoved him back, hard enough that he stumbled over the broken glass near the window. Then I turned my attention to Eric. You thought you could come here, in the middle of the night, and make a fool out of me? In front of your friends? You wanted to show them the old man was weak? Dad, he started, but I cut him off. Don't you dare call me that tonight. He swallowed hard. His hands shook, but he tried to keep his voice level. I needed the money. I was gonna put it back. Put it back? I barked a bitter laugh. You break into my house with strangers, smash my window, wake me from my bed, and you think this is some kind of loan? I stepped closer, the bat hanging low now, almost casual. You want money? I'll show you what it costs. I made him pick up his groaning friend, the one whose knee I'd shattered. Made the tall one carry their dropped flashlight and toss his empty bravado out with the broken glass. And then I walked them all outside, barefoot on the cold stone path, until they stood under the floodlight that lit the driveway. You see that camera? I pointed at the security light mounted above the garage. It's been recording since the moment you broke the glass. Police could be here in 10 minutes if I wanted. But I'm not calling them. Not yet. Eric looked up at me then, wide-eyed, confused. Why not? Because, I said, the shame of facing me is worse than a cell. I want you to live with this. I want you to wake up every day and remember the night you dragged your idiot friends into your father-in-law's villa, and I sent you crawling out like beaten dogs. The tall one muttered something about leaving, but I wasn't finished. I grabbed Eric by the collar, pulled him close enough that he could smell the sweat and fury on me. If you ever, step foot on my property again without my daughter, you'll wish I had called the cops tonight. You understand me? He nodded, eyes darting, throat dry. Say it. I understand. I shoved him back toward his friends. They stumbled down the driveway, the tall one half carrying the limping one. Eric turned once, looking like he wanted to speak, but one glare sent him hurrying after them. When the gate closed behind them, I stood there a long while, barefoot in the night air, the bat still in my hand. My heart was steady, calmer than it had been in months. They thought they had come to rob me. But what I'd taken from Eric that night was far more valuable. His pride, his power, the illusion that I was a man to be played with. And the best part? He knew I'd barely even started teaching him. The villa was quiet again by morning, but my mind wasn't. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at the cracked window they'd forced open. I hadn't fixed it yet. I wanted it left as a scar, a reminder. Every draft of cold air through that gap made me think of Eric's pale face when I grabbed his collar. By noon, my daughter came by, smiling as if the world was fine. Eric's at work, she said, placing a bag of groceries on the counter. He's been stressed, but he's trying. I just nodded. She didn't know what had happened the night before. Not yet. I decided she wouldn't hear it from me, not until I'd had my say with him first. That evening, I drove to their place. A modest little house on the edge of town, one I'd helped them buy when they first married. Eric's car sat in the driveway. I parked across the street and waited until I saw him come out with a bag of trash. He nearly dropped it when he noticed me leaning against my hood. We didn't speak until he crossed the street, eyes darting like a boy caught stealing candy. You told her? He asked quietly. No, I said. Not yet. But I will. Unless you and I settle this first. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing like he was trying to choke down his shame. What do you want? I want you to understand, I said, stepping closer, that you're in my family because of her, not because you deserve it. And I want you to know that last night was a warning. Next time you step out of line, I'll finish the job. He opened his mouth like he might argue, but I raised my hand and he froze. Don't lie to me, Eric. Don't tell me it was just the money. You wanted to prove something. You wanted to humiliate me. His silence was the answer I expected. So I leaned in, my voice low so no neighbor could hear. Here's how it's going to be. You're going to pay for that broken window. You're going to cover every cent of the damage. And you're going to show your wife, my daughter, the respect she deserves, because if I even smell betrayal again, I'll tell her everything, and then I'll come for you myself. His face twisted, pride wrestling with fear. But fear won. Fine, he muttered. Not fine, I snapped. This isn't a negotiation. This is me deciding what happens next. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving him standing in his own driveway like a scolded child. But as I slid behind the wheel, I caught sight of him in the rearview mirror. He was watching me with a look that wasn't just fear anymore. It was resentment, simmering, dangerous. That was when I realized he hadn't learned enough yet. Last night was a warning, yes, but a man like Eric doesn't change after one scare. No. For men like him, you have to break them piece by piece until they understand. And I was already planning how to do it. I'll tell you straight, I'm not proud of being cruel. I'm not the sort of man who takes pleasure in another's ruin. But there's a difference between cruelty and teaching a lesson your blood refuses to learn the easy way. Eric had chosen the hard road. He'd broken the glass of my life and walked in wearing a smile. So I started by taking things that mattered to him, not his body, not his life, but the things he built his courage from, reputation, comfort, certainty. Those are fragile things. They shatter easier than bones. For a week I did nothing overt. I kept the cracked window as it was. I moved slowly around the villa like a cat that's watched mice too often. I answered my phone less, kept my afternoons busy, let the house show its small wounds. News travels fast in our neighborhood. People saw the boarded-up pane and asked polite questions. The story became, someone tried to break in. That was true, but it was not the whole truth, and the half-truths are the ones that do the slowest work. Eric began to walk differently. I watched him from a distance the way you watch a weather front approach, eyes narrowed, measuring. First he came around with the check for the window repairs, throat tight, as if he wanted me to take it as a peace offering. I accepted the money, counted it, folded it into my wallet, and then, deliberately, left the receipt on the table. He asked if I was okay. I said, I'll be fine. I meant it, and I didn't. Not yet. He tried to act normal at family dinners, but his shoulders carried the night like a stone. My daughter watched him, of course, she's sharp in ways she hides, and she asked a question one afternoon that made me colder than anything I'd felt the night I hit that knee. Is everything all right between you and Eric? She asked, setting a teacup down. Her voice wasn't accusing. It carried that terrible blend of hope and fear you get when you're waiting for a man you love to stop being an idiot. I thought of telling her the truth, to unburden myself and let her rage at him cleanly. But I knew if I told her it would be like pouring gasoline into a fresh wound. She'd choose her man or her father without hesitating, and whichever she chose would scar both of them. So I lied, not to be cruel, but because there was more work to do. No, I said slowly. Everything's fine. And I let her believe it. The first part of the plan was simple humiliation. Eric's confidence came from the illusion of control: his car, his home, his ability to walk into my house and feel he owned it. I started with his circle. I called an old friend of mine who knew Eric's boss casually from a charity golf tournament. We'd been friends for 40 years. Favors between old men are cheap and clean. Over tea and a Bentley Club handshake, I let the friend mention, in passing, the villa break-in. Then I fed the rumor a little. Funny thing, boss, Eric was seen near a villa with 2 strangers the other night. Awkward. That's all it took. Small talk became suspicion. The company grapevine does the rest. Work isn't kind to men who look shaky. Within days, Eric found himself getting questions in meetings he'd never been asked before. How do you account for this? Can you justify that expense? A single well-placed whisper is enough in corporate corridors. I watched him shrink in public, watched his voice go thin during a presentation, watched his eyes search the crowd for sympathy and find none. Pride is a combustible thing. I was lighting match after match. Then I moved to the private things. I started returning his calls later than he expected. Not out of meanness, practicality, I told myself, because the old man's day is never empty, but timed enough so he'd sit there waiting, then call again and again. A man who learns to wait learns humility. He grew paranoid. He paced his house. He raised his voice at my daughter over trifles. I let them have those fights within earshot once or twice. Not loud enough to alarm anyone, but loud enough to build the soundtrack of a failing marriage. There was a line I didn't cross. I never told my daughter what he'd done. I didn't reveal the broken knee or the knife on the floor. That sort of confession either scatters a family like glass, or it becomes proof that you're the villain who robbed the child of her man. No, I wanted Eric to lose her faith of his own accord, to see her disillusionment grow like mold until he choked on it. The small things accumulated. He lost clients because he sounded distracted. He missed a payment on a loan because he'd driven across town to avoid a neighbor's stare and forgot. Credit calls came. He lied about his hours. He patched his pride with excuses, and every excuse made him weaker. One night, 3 weeks after the break-in, he came to my door. He looked older by months, hollowed at the temples, eyes rimmed red. Please, he said before I could speak. I don't know what's happening. I'm losing everything. He sounded like a child who'd been punished at school and now sought his teacher's mercy. In his voice was the tiny, honest fear that finally got me, not for him, but for my daughter. I invited him in. We sat at the kitchen table where the light was honest and sharp. He fidgeted with his hands. I thought you were going to call the police, he said. No, I said. I told you I wouldn't. I let the silence sit heavy between us. Do you know why? He swallowed. Because you wanted me to feel ashamed. Because shame is heavier than handcuffs, I said. When a man knows his wife sees him less, when he understands he is less than he pretended to be, that's the true punishment. It eats at him. It doesn't heal. And it gives him a choice. You can keep being the sort of man who breaks into others' homes, or you can become the sort of man who respects them. He stared at his hands like they might have answers pressed in the lines. How do I fix it? He asked in a voice so small I almost hated him for it. You fix it by not making me fix it for you, I said. You fix it by telling her the truth. All of it. Not a little. Not the parts that make you look best. The whole thing. You own the night, or you own the cowardice. He flinched as if I had struck him. Pride and fear warred on his face. If I tell her, she'll leave me. He breathed. She'll never forgive me. And if you don't tell her? I asked. She'll live a lie. You'll keep building a house on rotten foundations. One day it will collapse and everyone will get hurt. We sat a long while after that. I poured us both coffee, though he barely touched his. For the first time since the night of the bat and the broken knee, I felt something like pity. But pity is a dangerous thing. It can be a trap that lets men off the hook. He needed to be scared enough to change, not merely softened with my pity. He stood up then, shoulders taller, as if he'd made a decision. He left without a word, and I didn't follow him to watch. I didn't need to. I knew the line he would take, a confession at dinner, perhaps, or a note slipped under a pillow. I knew men like him because once I'd been younger and made my own lousy choices. You can teach a man better by letting him face his own hand. What I hadn't counted on was how other people might respond. Reputation is a fragile currency. The whispers that ruined his contracts sharpened into a question in my daughter's eyes. Why had he been nervous those nights? Why had he been distracted? She began to watch him the way a gardener watches an ailing plant, touching leaves for disease, measuring roots for rot. The night I expected him to confess, I found myself pacing in my study at midnight, the house full of the slow breathing of old furniture. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my daughter. She wrote one line, "Can we talk?" Now? Then another message, "Are you home?" Her messages trembled like the hand of someone holding an important knife. I stood there with the phone warm in my palm and the memory of midnight flashlights in my head, of that stupid, wet laugh when they thought they'd won. I could answer, go over and sit with her while he told the truth, cry with her, break with her. Or I could wait and see what the confession looked like when it came from him. There's a difference between forcing truth and letting it arrive as consequence. So I walked out onto the terrace and looked at the dark sea, and the wind cut my face. I thought about mercy and punishment, and the strange geometry that makes men like me decide how far to go. I couldn't tell if I'd become a protector or a warden. I only knew that when her next message came, it would change everything, and I wasn't sure yet whether it would be the end of Eric or the end of something I loved. Her phone glowed with a new message, "I'm on my way home. Please be there." The car in the driveway pulled up, lights washing the garden path. Through the glass I could see two figures silhouetted, my daughter small and rigid with purpose, and a third shape behind her that wasn't Eric. I dropped the bat I'd been idly twirling and felt the old habit of alertness bloom into readiness. Something about that third shadow set my teeth on edge. I could not tell yet if it was his friend, or a neighbor, or a stranger. But I felt the old electric certainty that the night's work had not yet finished, that some doors open in ways that reveal more than you intended. I slid the terrace door open and stepped into the cool air. The streetlight painted everything in hard gold. The silhouettes resolved into faces I recognized, and one I didn't. My daughter's hand was clenched on a phone, jaws set. The newcomer held himself too confidently, shoulders back like he owned the pavement. I took a breath, the wind smelling of salt and the faint perfume she always wore. I walked toward them. And then, just as I was about to speak, the unknown man lifted his chin and said a name I hadn't heard in 30 years. A name that made the chill at the base of my skull crawl colder than the night air. "Mr. Hammond?" he called. "We need to talk about what happened last month." I stopped dead. Because that name belonged to someone who carried authority, a badge, a uniform. And the uniform solves problems differently than a bat on a terrace. My heart picked up. My plans, petty and careful as they'd been, suddenly had new players. I opened my mouth to interrupt, to explain, to warn, but the sound left me. The car's engine cooled and my daughter's grip tightened on her phone. The stranger's eyes were steady. He was not a friend of Eric's. He was not a neighbor. He was a man who'd come with papers, or orders, or a story that could undo more than pride. Behind him, I could see the outline of another figure moving quickly, someone who wanted to be part of whatever unfolded, someone I had not expected to see at my gate that night. And when that figure turned toward me, I recognized the walk, the left shoulder slightly higher from an old injury, the way he tilted his head to listen. It was the man who had been with Eric the night they broke my window. He looked back at me with a face that said he'd been caught between a debt and a dare. For a breath, everything hung exactly where it should not, the night, the parked cars, my daughter's pale face, the two men who carried the night's consequences. Then the unknown man cleared his throat and said, softer this time, "We need to go inside." And I had to decide, tell the truth now and take the consequences, or keep the secrets that had been tilled into darkness, and see where that would lead. I stepped forward, the bat cold in my hand, and the terrace light threw our shadows long and thin on the stone. The air tasted of metal and something like fate. "Come in," I said, and my voice sounded like an old engine starting. The door opened. The stranger stepped through my door first, moving with that quiet assurance of a man who knows he has the upper hand. My daughter followed, her eyes darting from him to me, searching for some anchor. Behind them came the limping shadow of the man whose knee I'd shattered. He leaned against the doorframe, face pale, still carrying the memory of that night. "Mr. Hammond," the stranger said again, calm but firm. "My name's Lewis. Detective Lewis. We need to discuss the break-in at your villa." The word detective cut the air like a blade. My daughter gasped. "Break-in?" she whispered, her voice small, like a child hearing thunder for the first time. She looked at me, waiting for me to deny it. I didn't. "Yes," I said slowly, my eyes fixed on Eric's limping friend. "We had visitors." Detective Lewis pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. "This man," he gestured to the limping one, "showed up at the hospital a few nights ago with a badly damaged knee. Claimed he'd fallen. But when pressed, he admitted he was inside this property. He also claims you assaulted him." I didn't flinch. "He broke into my home. With 2 others." I defended myself. "That's all there is to it." The detective studied me carefully, pen hovering over the paper. "The problem is, Mr. Hammond, the man says he was invited. That he knew your son-in-law. That this wasn't a burglary, but a dispute." My daughter's hand shot to her mouth. She looked from me to the injured man, then back again. "Eric," she breathed. "What did you do?" And there it was, the name that had hovered unspoken, the truth I had left for Eric to confess. Except now it was being dragged into the light by a stranger with a badge. The limping man leaned forward, bitterness etched into every line of his face. "Your husband brought us here." He spat at her. "Told us there was money, told us the old man wouldn't fight back. He lied to us. Got me crippled for life." My daughter staggered back as if struck. No, he wouldn't." Her voice faltered, even as her eyes betrayed the doubt already crawling into her heart. Detective Lewis closed his notebook with a soft snap. "I'm not here to make arrests tonight. I just want the truth on record. But I'll say this, Mr. Hammond." His gaze hardened. "Vigilante justice makes my job harder. You understand?" I didn't answer. My silence was its own admission. He turned to leave, pausing only to give me a look that carried both warning and a kind of reluctant respect. "Keep your house in order," he said. "Because if this gets out of hand again, I won't be knocking first." The door shut behind him, and the villa sank into a heavy quiet. My daughter stood in the middle of the room, trembling. "Dad," she whispered, "is it true? Eric brought them here?" I wanted to soften it. I wanted to shield her one more time. But lies are poison, and she already had enough poison in her veins. "Yes," I said. "He did." Her knees gave out, and she sank into a chair, tears streaking her face. How could he do that to you? To us?" I placed a hand on her shoulder, firm, steady. "Because men like him only learn when they lose everything." And in that moment I realized the final act of this revenge wasn't mine to carry out. It was hers. She would have to choose, stand by the man who betrayed us both, or burn the bridge herself and walk back toward the family that had always protected her. The night was no longer about bats and broken knees. It had become about blood, trust, and the price of betrayal. And I knew, whichever way she chose, it would end with someone shattered.